which shuts everything down again. This is the bumpy plateau. I think it's fairly certain that the mortal blow to human industrialized civilization will happen when oil prices spike again and nobody can afford to buy that oil, and everything will just shut down. The collapse must happen fast in order to leave infrastructure standing. We've all heard the stories about infrastructure, you know, the sewers and the bridges and the roads and all that. Well, the point is that as economic collapse continues or accelerates, those structures will fall into more and more disrepair. There's not going to be any money or anything running to fix those. So what you want to have is the change to a new paradigm, getting the old one out of the way, while there's still infrastructure left to start building something new. We have to survive the transition phase of human civilization, which I anticipate could last anywhere between 20 years, and oh my God, would that be fast and hard, you know, to 50 years or 100 years before some kind of stable civilization starts to emerge. You need to survive the transition phase. So don't panic, don't freak out. Use your heads, analyze your local situation where you live. Don't worry about rebuilding sewers. You're going to be able to get water for a few years. People say there's either oil or no oil. There's either food or no food. And people say, well, we're going to have food in the supermarkets on Tuesday and we're never going to see it again. That's not the way it's going to happen. As things break down, we will see specific shortages in specific areas for periods of days before it gets to the point where there's nothing left. So what you need to prepare for is not the end result, but you need to prepare to survive the transition. You know, people say, okay, I'm going to run for the hills. I'm going to go build a cabin. I'm going to buy 10 million cans of baked beans. Well, they're probably going to be the first to die. Number one, it's too late. If you don't know how to live off the land, and if you're not already on the land right now, don't even try to go, because you're going to fail miserably, and you might be shot by the people who got there ahead of you.
You know, the one factor that you're not including in some of this is just sort of discounting human ingenuity. Or our ability to sort of problem solve?
Because my father was an Air Force aviator, combat veteran, he was very much trained in a military style of decision-making and analysis where it's motivated by life and death decisions, where you are trained how to think critically and respond critically in response to emergency. So I was trained at an early age in the skill of critical thinking. And maybe I have a gift for it, too. I believe there are some people who have a gift for critical thinking. And my own experience on the streets in South Central Los Angeles as a cop, there were quick decisions, sometimes decisions which changed people's lives or could end people's lives. And it gave me an ability to respond and think, to separate the ice cream from the bullshit. Probably one of the biggest impediments I removed to critical thinking was I stopped taking mainstream media seriously a long time ago.
All right. But we were talking about human ingenuity.
No amount of technology and no amount of human ingenuity can possibly overturn the laws of physics, the laws which govern this planet. Those are intractable, immutable, real, and science has never been able to do that. Man's great arrogance, I believe, and one for which he's paying a price now, is to believe that mankind really could become God and even turn over and upset and revoke somehow the laws of the universe. I am a great advocate of buying and owning physical gold, not paper gold. You buy gold, you own it. When hyperinflation occurs, after deflation here, and all these trillions of dollars come back and we are wheeling wheelbarrows of $1,000 bills to buy a loaf of bread, the only thing people will accept for goods is going to be gold. Do whatever you can to re-insulate your house if you need to, if you have a house. If you have soil, you immediately get it off petrochemicals and start learning how to restore it. What I do in the yard where I'm renting, I'm mixing barbecue and wood ash, and then I go out and pee on everything, because then you get the root elements of ammonium nitrate that starts to bring the soil back. If you are dependent upon a cell phone, get a landline. All of the telecommunications companies that operate the satellites, the cell towers, the fiber optic cables, and all this stuff that makes your wonderful cell phone work are cutting back on maintenance as the stock market collapses, and we're going to see failures in cell phone service. A landline is a redundancy that can help you. Get books on first aid and holistic medicine. Moderate freshwater supply. The reasonable amount of food storage. You can't store enough to live on. What you need to store is seeds. Seeds that are not manufactured by Monsanto, that are not Franken seeds, that only work one time you plant them and then you gotta go buy more. You get good, organic, whole seeds and you store them. That could be a great currency in the future. Unlike the Great Depression, this is a vastly different scenario. We do not have infinite resources left to be tapped. We don't have lots of land. We're at peak everything, all the commodities, everything else. And what they had in the 1930s that my grandparents told me about was the ability to grow food right where they live. And local food production is perhaps the most fundamental key to human survival in the collapse of industrialized civilization. We've had examples of what happens when oil disappears and how civilizations respond and what works and what doesn't. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and there were two nations that were absolutely and totally dependent upon Soviet oil for their survival because they had none, Cuba and North Korea. And what they did in response to that was completely opposite, and the proof, as they say, was in the pudding. North Korea was a rigid, hierarchical, top-down, Soviet-style, bureaucratic regime where everything came from the central government, they managed everything, and North Korea starved. I mean, it was, in human terms, the suffering was amazing. All of a sudden, there's no oil, there's no natural gas, there's no fertilizer, cars don't run, trains don't run. You get to a point where you can run trains on some day and generate electricity on others, but you can't do both at the same time. But the Cuban government reverted to one of the purest forms of capitalism. It said, everybody start restoring the soil and grow food. You will grow food where you live. If you find any piece of arable land that's not being used, you occupy it and you start farming it and you start growing food right now. The Cuban government did everything it could to liberate local food growing. And what happened was, after a very tough period, the Cuban people were eating better than they had ever eaten because they were free of this whole agribiz, Franken food nightmare. Everything was organic. And you had every square inch in Havana that had soil on rooftops or in flower boxes was growing food. And there was a degree of sustainability. Everything became organic. And all you had to do was separate the people from the way money worked and top-down control. Explain to them, you grow it where you eat it, and you're going to make it. And Cuba survived and thrived. And that's the essence of where everything is going to in the new human paradigm. Everything will be local. Jack London was one of my favorite writers and wrote about animals a lot. One thing you know about animals is that they all want to go home when they know that they're going to face death. They don't want to be in their tribe or their pack or whatever it is. They want to be on familiar ground. It's a natural animal instinct. In Dubai, the economic crash has hit so hard that Indians who were living and working in Dubai lost their jobs, and they just drove to the Dubai airport and abandoned their cars. And there was a story talking about all the cars that were abandoned as these Indians caught a one-way ticket home to go home. And it's happening in Britain, too. You have lots of Poles and Eastern Europeans who were the latecomers into EU fleeing Britain to go home. Now, in some areas, and certainly in the southern